Well, I'm joined now on the programme by our business editor, Cole Stangler. Hi, Cole. You're going to be talking us through Emmanuel Macron's economic record, which is obviously contested here in France. Now, before we get to what's expected in his new term, walk us through why his record so far has been controversial.
Yeah, so a lot really depends on what perspective you're coming from. From an American point of view or British point of view, the policies of the last 5 years might seem fairly standard, sort of a boilerplate, business-friendly agenda. But within the French context, where the state has a bigger role in the economy and where you have more expansive social protections, this is a president who's seen as governing from the center-right or quite simply from the right when it comes to economic policy. So when he first won office back in 2017, Macron campaigned on wanting to roll back state intervention, promising to cut public sector jobs, promising to reduce taxes. And that's very much how he began his presidency with what can be described as neoliberal economic policies. Now, just to walk you through some of these here, one of the most emblematic, the repeal of the wealth tax, which he transformed into a more limited levy on real estate, used to apply to 1.3 million euros in assets, people with over that sum. As you can see here, a bunch of other ones. New flat tax on investment capital gains. He reformed labor laws to make it easier to lay off workers, weakening the power of collective bargaining agreements negotiated by unions. Also, reforms to the unemployment insurance system, tightening scrutiny of those receiving aid, overhaul of the state rail system. All this very much in line with his pro-business platform, which in many respects sees the state and regulation as hindering private sector growth. Now, where it gets more complicated is that Macron has also changed tack on more than a few occasions. His presidency has been marked by a set of crises, and each of which has really seen his government adopt a set of more interventionist, you might call them, policies. The first one was the yellow vest back in late 2018. So to try to appease protesters, he expanded a subsidy aimed at low-wage workers along with some other measures. There was, of course, COVID and the famous whatever it costs philosophy. It's how the state subsidized employers to basically keep workers on payroll. And also on the European level, France under Macron played a role in pushing the EU to adopt stimulus and to also suspend very controversial rules on public debt and public spending. The third one, as you can see there, more recently, the spike in energy costs, which of course has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. Macron's government has put price caps into place there, which means that it's a very different situation than the one we're seeing, for example, in the UK, where you have really costs rising significantly. All this makes his record somewhat difficult to categorize. So very much a pro-business reformer, right-wing, even in the French political context, but at the same time not hostile to state intervention when the moment is right. And there have been quite a few of these moments really over the last 5 years.
And he obviously has now been re-elected, Cole. What do you think we'll expect from him in terms of economic policy in his second term?
Yeah, I mean, so much of this is really going to depend on his ability to have a majority in the National Assembly. We have those legislative elections coming up in June. Now, Macron is expected to have a leg up just because he's just won re-election, but polls suggest that it could be a little tricky. And if you had a left-wing majority, for instance, hostile to Macron, that would be very different from a scenario with a Macronist majority in the Assembly. The same could be said for that matter of a right-wing or far-right majority in opposition to Macron. That's the first point that really can't be stressed enough. Who's going to be that majority in Parliament? Now, that said, there are a few specific concrete policies that Macron has campaigned on. And true to form, they sort of reflect this kind of double-edged style of governance I was just mentioning. So we'll start with a couple of straightforward neoliberal economic policies. One, a hike in the standard retirement age. Macron wants to raise it from 62 to 65. And let's take a listen here to Bruno Le Maire, the finance minister. He defended that measure earlier today.
I think that the framework defined by the President of the Republic was sufficiently clear. We're not touching the upper limit at which one can receive full retirement benefits. We are aiming for 65 years as the legal age from which you can trigger your right to a pension. We'll implement a review clause in 2028 as the reform takes effect, and then you have to account for hardship and long careers. All of this is subject to negotiation.
So that was just Bruno Le Maire, the finance minister. Now, Nadia, another one of these sort of pro-business, neoliberal, you might call them reforms, would cover a popular welfare program that's targeted at the least well-off. Macron wants to tighten conditions for the 2 million people currently getting this aid, known as the RSA here in France. The president wants people getting that aid to work 15 to 20 hours a week to keep getting that aid. Now, at the same time, and this, Nadia, you might know, is one of the president's signature phrases, en même temps, at the same time, Macron has called for big spending on the environment, injecting 50 billion euros of public spending over the next 5 years is what he's calling for. It's a 10 billion euros a year. And this would cover renovating buildings, planting trees, support for farmers. He also wants a new prime minister that would be in charge of environmental planning, making it really a centerpiece of his presidency. So, again, at the end of the day, so much of this is going to depend on whether he has that majority in parliament that's going to shape his presidency. And we'll know that in June when France, of course, heads to the polls, again, to elect that new parliament.
We will see what happens. Thanks very much indeed for your analysis. Cole Stangler, our business editor, for us there.